Hey guys, so last week we started learning about World War One, and today we're going to continue learning about that. You learned last week about the causes of World War One. We had the acronym MANIA, militarism. The A was alliances. The N was nationalism. The I was imperialism, and the other A was assassination. So as you can see here, you have the world at war. All these red countries are together as Central Powers. These green countries are together as Allied powers. And then these yellow countries, they don't really care. They're not really in the war. But, so this is what you have. And today we're going to learn about something called trench warfare. And trench warfare was quite terrible. Just a lot of trench warfare took place along the border between Germany and France and then elsewhere. But we'll get into that. So what you need is your notes page. At the top of it, it says World War I trench warfare, and then it has the chart below it where you have the main idea, and then you have to write the details. Why is it important? What does it make you think? So we'll go ahead and get started on that. Now, a lot of these, some of them are just pictures, and I just want to know like what you see in the pictures and stuff like that. But we'll talk about each. Okay. So the first idea that you need to learn about is what is trench warfare. So on your notes, just copy this part right here. It says trench warfare, the type of fighting during World War I in which both sides dug trenches protected by mines and barbed wire. So put that in your notes. And then take a look down at this. This is a trench warfare. You have the people. So, for example, this might be the barbed wire. Say this is France's side. Here's France's side. Across this barbed wire is going to be Germany, okay? Germany's side, Germany's lines. So you don't want Germany to get across that barbed wire. Then you have these sandbags that protect the people that are down in these trenches. So the soldiers lived in these trenches, and we're going to learn further in this lecture why it was so horrible. They walked on these duck boards and so that they wouldn't get in the mud. But we'll learn more about that. Okay, here is a picture of how the trenches were set up. So here's the barbed wire. Here would be the enemies crossing, and this is important to know. No man's land. No man's land is this stretch of land between the two trenches where it's been destroyed by fire, and nobody really owns this land. It's just like the middle ground for people to fight. But the soldiers, so this is one side. This is a trench network. So these are the front line of the trenches. And then back in here, you have these little rooms even dug in for the trenches. Mail would be delivered through these trenches. You have people running back and forth. Anyway, so if you can imagine a soldier's life at this time, living in this area for weeks or months on end without ever coming out of it sometimes, and whatever weather you have, imagine if it rains a lot. You are going to be in a lot of mud, and which is going to lead to a lot of problems that we're going to learn about. Continuing. Okay, this is something you need to write about on your notes. It's going to be under the title Battle of the Somme. So the Somme is a river in Britain, is a river in France. And this is a fighting around that. Now, you notice how many people you see in this picture. We have one here. He's about watching out. He's shooting. Then you have one here. See the legs? You have one here, if you see the legs and the arm and the helmet. You have one here, foot, blanket, helmet, one here. Looks like there's only one there. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. All in this one little area. You lived outside You did not go inside. Can you imagine the winter months, how horrible this would be? And who even knows? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if one of these guys was dead, to be honest. So put something about this picture in your notes. How many people you see or what you notice about it. Okay. This, you're going to have to open the link up on another window. And I'll post this link on Blackboard. But All Quiet on the Western Front was a movie that came out in the 1930s. It came out after about 15 years after World War I ended, and it depicted the French and the Germans fighting against one another. So I would like you to go and click on this link and give that 3-minute clip give it a watch. If you watch towards the end of it, you'll notice what happens when someone gets caught in the barbed wire. It's really kind of gross. That cuts off their hands. So, it's not funny, but it's gross. You should go watch it. So, go watch that, and then on your notes, write something about All Quiet on the Western Front. This is an aerial photograph of the opposing trenches and no man's land in France. German trenches are up on the right here. And the bottom, the British trenches are on the top left. The vertical line to the left of the center indicates the course of a pre-war road. So this is a road. This area between the trenches would be no man's land. And then this is their big old network of trenches, which is just crazy to me. So the front line of the trenches would be here. But then maybe the generals and stuff stayed back here. You don't have to write anything for that. Alright, you do need to write something under the caption of trench rats on your notes. So, I'm just going to read you this. There's a poem. But many men killed in the trenches were buried almost where they fell. These corpses, as well as the food scraps that litter the trenches, attracted rats. Which is, they're going to be really gross rats. These rats were huge, but... okay, says, this is a quote, just listen to it. The rats were huge. They were so big they would eat a wounded man if he couldn't defend himself. I saw some rats running from under the dead men's great coats, enormous rats, fat with human flesh. My heart pounded as we edged towards one of the bodies. His helmet had rolled off. The man displayed a grimacing face, stripped of flesh, the skull bare, the eyes devoured, and from the yawning mouth leapt a rat. So the rat ate the guy's eyes out, which is so gross. But if you go Google a picture of these rats, they are huge. They're like bigger than a football huge. They're very scary to look at. And that's one aspect of trench life, though, that they had to deal with if you're a soldier in World War I. So, write something about the trench rats on your notes. Anything about them. Okay, so, if you were in World War I fighting in trenches, you know, sometimes you had to walk in mud, especially if it rained a lot. And so this is a communication trench. It's flooded. Now, if you notice, all these men, your feet are in water. There's nowhere to climb out. If you climb out, you get shot. So you can't. So you have to keep your feet in water. And what happens to your feet when you're in water? They get really soggy. And your skin can tear really easily and get infected. And so this next slide will show you what happens. Trench foot. Your skin gets a cut in it, it gets infected, and it's disgusting, and you can't walk, and your feet sometimes have to get amputated. So you should have written something about trench foot on your notes. Now, this next couple slides is going to be about gas attacks. I'm going to read this poem to you, and you can just write anything you want about gas attacks. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched to sleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, blood-shod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of appointed shells that dropped behind. Gas! Gas, quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone was still yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile, incurable stores of innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori, how fitting and sweet it is to die for one's country. So in that poem, it talks about what it's like for someone to die with a gas attack, or through a gas attack. And at the end of the poem, it says, "'Tis so sweet to die in war," or something like that. And it's saying soldiers and families of dead soldiers wouldn't think it was so sweet to die in war if they knew what death actually looked like, which is if you die with a gas attack. He talks about the blood gurgling and going blind and not being able to walk and all that stuff. So he's saying death is not beautiful. It's horrible. Anyway, so this picture, you don't need to write anything for this picture specifically, but soldiers digging trenches while protected against gas attacks. As you can see, they are protected a little bit by these. Got their wraps. Now, the German side had legit gas masks. These were not as good, clearly. And then if you look at this picture, if you notice what they all have in common, we've got all of these men have blindfolds. So their eyes have been somewhat compromised due to a gas attack. And these men, maybe either they're dead or they can't walk. And these men are having to hold on to each other to get around because they can't see. So before we go on, make sure that you have written something in the box out to the right of gas attacks on your paper. Here's one more thing you could write on the gas attacks. So these are poison gas deaths. Which country do you think had the most deaths? Well, let's look at which country just got wounded, didn't actually die. That would be down here here. Russia had 419,000 something get wounded, and then the country that had the most gas attacks was also Russia, because they had the total deaths. Russia actually had many soldiers fighting in the war, and they got exhausted because they fought for a really long time. They ran out of supplies. That's a fun fact. But yeah, okay, so Russia had the most poisonous gas deaths. Now, before you go on, make sure that you had something for gas attacks written down. So all I want to point out here is the machine gun. In World War I, you have a big use of these machine guns, this higher technology of weapons. And what that does for you is it adds death toll. So in the Civil War, they didn't have machine guns, and you had to shoot one person at a time. This way you can just boom, do rounds, and you'd hit a lot more people. So yeah, that's one reason you had so many deaths and so many wounded in World War I, because of this new technology being able to kill more people at one time. Okay, you need to write this out next to the Western Front box. Write this part here. and then this part down here. So the Western Front was an area of over 400 miles of trenches across Belgium and France. It's this red line here. Most offenses resulted in heavy casualties but gained little territory. That means when you have these people entrenched, if you were, say Germany was attacking France, Germany, if they put themselves out there, they ran across no man's land, they would get heavy casualties. A lot of people would get wounded. A lot of people would get killed, but they would gain little territory. So this way of fighting wasn't very efficient in regards to human life and land gain at the same time. Well, you had a loss of human life, but not a lot of land gain. And the Western Front, that movie that I wanted you to watch, is called All Quiet on the Western Front. It just talks about how in these trenches it is quiet because there's not a lot of territory gained back and forth. And yeah. Okay. You have a box for this, military casualties in World War I. You need to, you can write whatever you want in that box, but I would suggest maybe you write which country had the most casualties in World War I, and then which country had the least. So, and casualties refer to wounded and dead both combined. So Germany in military casualties had nearly 2 million people die or wounded, whereas the lowest one is Japan. The United States is about in the middle of the group. We didn't come into war until 1917. Japan was not heavily involved in the war, but they did have a pretty big part at some point. Japan is going to be more well known for World War II, and Germany will also be in World War II as well. Germany and Russia are up there with the most losses and most wounded casualties in World War I. All right. So this is going to be the last section on your paper. Should say Christmas Truce, 1914, something like that. So I'm going to tell you a story about this area here. So this is the Western Front, which we just learned is the 400 miles, and the red is the area in which the truce was observed. So all this, the truce is where you have people stopping their bickering, stopping their fighting, and agreement for a time to just stop. And this happened on Christmas. British and German troops. This is a German, you have his pointy hat, and then the British, are they not pointy hat guys? They are standing together on Christmas in 1914, 1915. This is only going to be a few years after the war starts, and I'll tell you, there's one more slide. So this story right here, one of the most remarkable incidents in history was the impromptu truce that took place on the Western Front on Christmas Day, 1914. Beginning late on Christmas Eve, the entrenched British and German troops began serenading each other with songs and carols. By the next day, a full truce was on, with soldiers and officers from both sides fraternizing and exchanging gifts. There was even an international soccer match played with teams comprising of warring soldiers. On December 26, 1914, the First World War started again. How sad. 94 years later, in 2008, soldiers from the same opposing regiments reenacted the famous Christmas truce in the same location. So, on Christmas Day, 1914, this was, so the war started in August, October, November, 4 months-ish into the war, 4 months into a 4-year-long war. And these men, think about the weather that you're going to have. In December, they're cold. All of a sudden, the British start hearing the Germans sing Stille Nacht, which is the version of Silent Night, but it's in German. So they start singing to each other, and then they come out of their trenches without their weapons, and they exchange gifts. These gifts would be things like things that they got mailed from home. One example would be chocolate. Another example would be pictures of loved ones. They would exchange those with the soldiers. And Then they also had a soccer game. They came out and they played on No Man's Land. And what this shows you is that, these countries were at war. But to be honest, they didn't really, the soldiers themselves, they didn't really know why exactly they were at war. They'd just been sitting in trenches, fighting, and people have been dying, but nothing had been happening. They didn't know what was going on. And they say, you know what, for a day we're going to stop, we're going to get along, we're going to be human with each other. And I think this is a very special event. Now, not all people liked this Christmas truce. Hitler, who was a mailboy in the trenches in World War I, when he heard about this Christmas truce, he flipped out. He thought, how could a nation, when we're fully at war, he was very supportive of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Germany. And so he was just gung-ho about winning the war, and he couldn't imagine stopping the fighting. So he was very upset by this news. But it just shows you all people, no matter what side of the war you're on, are human and have emotions and feelings and families and traditions. And, they respect each other for a day. So I thought that was really nice. So this is the last slide. You should have your paper full of for the Christmas truce one. You can just write anything special about this. As long as you have something written about each thing in the box, it can be just a fun little fact that you heard. I don't care. There are no wrong answers in this assignment except for blank answers. So make sure something is filled in each box and turn it in to me. And we're going to learn a little bit more about World War I in the next lesson. Bye.